Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. A good dark topic, let's do it. What's something that happened to you in childhood that you didn't care about, but then when you got older, looking back, you realized how creepy it really was? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I started walking to school in the 4th grade. We lived in a country club neighborhood at the time, so my mom figured I would be safe enough. The school was a little over a mile away through nice houses. One day, this woman in a van followed me all the way home, and I was a little weirded out. When I got home, she called me over, and I went to see what was up. There were 3 kids in the van, and that made me feel better. She asked for our home phone number so she could call my mom. It turns out she noticed on her way home that this middle-aged man in a pink car had followed me for a few days in a row, and she wanted to call my mom to ask if she could give me a ride home after school since my parents both worked. My mom met that weekend, and she gave me rides for the next year and a half until I went to junior high school. I love that woman for giving me a ride out of her way just to keep a random kid safe. My uncle is holding my his daughter's kitten, and threatening to burn its eye out with his lit cigarette. He was holding the end of the cigarette about an inch from the kitten's eye. I remember seeing the heat coming off of it. I don't even remember a reason, just being an asshole and thinking it was funny. We were about 4 or 5. I never forgot it and always avoided him after that. I'm over 60 now, and he's still alive, but I can't remember ever being in a room with him in it since. One afternoon, my friend and I, 6th grade at the time, were walking from her house to school for a school dance. The school was only about 2 blocks away, so we assumed we would be fine. Suddenly, this car stops right in front of us, and an adult man who looked about 30 got out of the car and started walking toward us, saying something like, "Hey ladies, where are you off to?" My friend just told me to walk faster, not look at him, so we awkwardly ignored him and walked around his car and ran the rest of the way. We chalked it up to us just looking older than we were, and he mistakenly thought we were around his age. I remember this encounter when I looked at the pictures we took of ourselves that day, and it's very obvious we were still children. Gross. I was staying at a new friend's house when I was about 9, and her uncle was babysitting us. He asked to play Truth or Dare. You dared me to take my underwear off. I went around the corner, pulled them down, and backed up. Then I felt weird, so I ran home. The girl and I stopped being friends after that. She was mean to me. I was mean to her. We were kids. A couple of years later, I was pulled into the office at school, and 2 cops were asking me questions about that night. When asked what the uncle was wearing, I recalled in detail, adding that something was sticking out of his shorts. One of the cops said, "His penis?" And I said yes. If it wasn't apparent, the uncle had been R-ing his niece. I had blocked it from my memory until recently and have had a hard time dealing with it since. I think about her every day and hope she's kicking ass at life. I hope he's rotting in a cell, or worse. I actually had the stereotypical, "Hey little girl, will you help me look for my lost puppy kidnapping attempt" happen to me. I was playing in my front yard and a man drove up and parked on the street. He got out of the car and came up to me. He was carrying a leash. He said that he lost his puppy and asked if I could help him look for it. I said that I had to ask my mom first. He said that it wouldn't take very long, so I didn't need to bother her. I told him I didn't want to get in trouble. He put his hand on my back and tried to steer me toward the street where he was parked, asking if I could look at something real quick. My mom came outside at that exact moment and told me to come inside. She asked the man what he was doing, and he kind of mumbled something, then said, "Never mind," and quickly left. I didn't think anything of it at the time, other than wondering why my mom seemed upset and giving me a big hug after I told her what happened. I thought of it randomly one time as an adult and was like, oh my God, someone tried to kidnap me. I don't even want to think about what would have happened if I had just gone with him. This isn't what I saw but heard, and I was between 7 and 10 years old based on where I remember hearing this. In the 1980s, living in a fairly nice urban area, we roamed the quiet streets and talked with other kids from our school when we bumped into each other. There was a little girl, I think she was about 7, who was quite small for her age and very quiet. I didn't know her or see her very often, but one day some kids were telling all the kids they met that she had confessed to someone that she was having an affair with her dad and sleeping with her dad. I didn't really understand what it meant, just that it was something scandalous. I forgot about it for decades until childhood living in that area, and I was absolutely horrified to realize what she was really going through and how none of us likely ever told any grown-ups, because while we knew it was a hush-hush thing that we shouldn't know about, we didn't understand the real reasons why it was bad. A buddy of mine in the burbs lived on a quiet street. One of the houses had weird shit going on, and we always wondered if it was a grow-op or something. It backed into a popular walking path that I used to get home from school, and it's like no one lives there. Overgrown yard, nothing ever changed, spots, curtains always drawn, but all lights on 24/7. One day I actually saw like 5 Asian dudes in the backyard, and one was digging a hole for some reason. Also, he was missing a finger, which I didn't think much of. Well, one summer, my buddy and one of his neighbors noticed that every Tuesday around 1 or 2 a.m., a Hummer would come down the street, throw a duffel bag onto the lawn of the house, and take off. Someone would eventually come out and pick up the bag within an hour of its drop-off. One day, my buddy's neighbor was out having a smoke and saw the drop-off, but he could see something sticking out of the bag in the darkness. Once the Hummer leaves, he goes over and opens the bag, which is filled with some sort of AK variant assault rifle. He saw a barrel sticking out of the bag. In a panic, the neighbor runs back to his own garage, still holding the rifle, and calls 911. He puts the rifle back and does the bag up, and nothing happens. The cops never show up, and eventually someone comes out of the house and grabs the bag. The next Tuesday, the Hummer appears again for the drop-off. As it approaches the house, all hell breaks loose. Cops appear out of nowhere, armed with carbines. The SWAT team rips onto the street, and several undercovers. They arrest the 2 guys in the Hummer and raid the house. They were a Chinese trio. They would store guns and drugs at the house until they got to move to their next destination. They dug holes in some spots to hide some of the shit. If I remember correctly, the cops excavated the whole backyard and found all kinds of hidden caches. Forever ago as a kid, I thought my grandfather was a great guy. When I was a kid, he had this big jar of little rocks that he said he collected when he was in the Korean War. I played with those things for years. Once my grandfather passed, my dad told me all those little rocks in the jar and how they were teeth of every person he'd killed in the war. It's pretty creepy to learn about. I was spending the week with my dad, and one night his friend came over. I recognized he was pretty out of it. They went and partied, or did whatever they did. The next morning I went into the living room and saw him kind of slumped over. I tried waking him up, went to my dad's room and told him, "Your friend is sleeping weird." My dad went and looked, then locked me in the bedroom. Shortly after, I heard a bunch of people in the house. Long story short, he overdosed, and I found him. Yeah, when you don't have perspective and you find somebody or an adult just sleeping, I can see how that wouldn't affect you. Your dad did the right thing by getting you out of there. Sorry you went through that. A woman in her 30s is watching us kids play without having kids and trying to get kids to her home. One day a parent started a fight with her, and she never showed up again. I didn't get why he was so unfriendly toward her. A dude brought a bag of trash to the park, and another one picked it up shortly after. I saw it multiple times and never thought anything of it. Not illegal per se, but our neighbor 2 doors down constantly had cars stopping by during the day for a few minutes at a time. Being 9 in my safe suburban neighborhood, I didn't think anything of it. Until one day, I'm across the street playing outside with a friend. The landscaper walks over and tells us to get inside the house. We laugh at him and said, "No." He got dead serious, flashed a badge, and said, "Get inside the house." If you've ever seen the beginning of the U.S. Marshals, it was like that. The homeowners were apparently dealing drugs from their house. My sister made me put on a long dark raincoat and told me to stand in the middle of the road. She told me that the triangles on my boots would light up when the lights of a car shone on them, and she wanted to see how bright they were. After a minute I asked her a question, and when I turned around she wasn't there. She had gone inside and was up the stairs in her room. At 5 years old, I thought nothing of it, but now all these years later, I have no doubt that she wanted me to get hit by a car. For whatever reason, I had to share a bed with my mother and her boyfriends growing up. Not all the time, but often enough that I had an absolute disdain for hearing people have sex due to them always effing with my laying right next to them. Ugh. I'm also witnessing my mom give BJs to dudes in the car while I'm sitting in the back. Looking back as a 28-year-old adult, it's likely an entirely different world than what I'm living in now. It absolutely blows my mind, what I considered normal at that age. One night when I was 9 years old, I was walking down the street and noticed a group of people gathered nearby. One guy asked another, "Is this little kid with you?" And the other guy replied, "Yes, he's coming with us." As soon as I heard that, I started running. It was creepy back then, but now I realize how dangerous it could have been. I was at a Boy Scout camp out in the woods behind bar. We kids were allowed to go inside to use the restroom. As I was leaving the men's room, I saw a man hurriedly leaving the ladies' room, and the door closed slowly behind him. I could see a lady I recognized from my neighborhood lying face down on the floor in that little space under a stall door. She looked sweaty and appeared to be struggling. I called out to her and started toward the door when the guy who had just left the room headed me off and told me that she would be fine, that she had had too much to drink and she fell. I remembered or worked through these things later on in therapy. 7 years old, my next-door neighbor was an elderly man who was friends with my grandmother, who I lived with, and he polished rocks. This matters because my grandma and I would always go on beach trips and bring back agates and pretty rocks that he would then polish for us. Anyway, one summer day I was bored and had just gotten done watching something on Nickelodeon that was a competition game for kids where they would crawl around and try to steal people's socks. Whoever got the most socks won. I went over to the old man's house, looked at the rocks, and suggested playing a sock game. The man agreed, and after playing and him winning, he asked me to sit on his bed while he used the restroom. I did as he said, and he came out a little later completely naked. This is all I can remember to this day. Grandma admitted to me later on in life, around 20 years old, that she knew something had happened, and she said she threatened to do very bad things to him if he ever came near us again. It explains why I never saw him again. 9 to 12 years old, lived with a foster family, and the dad would have their Rhodesian Ridgeback go and grab wild rabbits. Then the dad would take them by the neck and swing them around in the air until they died. Hearing a rabbit scream or wail will never leave my mind. This was also the man who AR'd me repeatedly. Yes, I went to court for it, missed trial, and didn't want to go back. He died in 2019, thankfully. 13 years old. Stepdad and uncle invite work friends over to the house to drink and play poker, which is not uncommon, and they got very drunk this night. There was this guy Lincoln who was a little more mellow and kind. My stepdad and uncle started picking on him. Uncle decides that they should start making fun of his old Ford Explorer or something similar. Stepdad decides to go and piss on said vehicle, not just on it, like the handles and shit. Lincoln obviously gets heated, pushes stepdad. My stepdad then proceeds to go into the bedroom closet, unlock his safe, and take out his unloaded 9mm handgun. He then takes it into the living room, points it at Lincoln, laughing. Everyone left, and my mom and stepdad got into a fight. When I was in elementary school, there was this boy who would chase me to grab my crotch. Every recess, I would have my friends protecting me in a corner of a chain-linked fence so he couldn't get me. One day I was running away, fell, and skimmed up my knee pretty bad. Recess was over, and we went back to class. The teacher pulled me out of class to tell me how girls should behave and not to lead him on. I was ashamed and thought it was my fault. I stopped having my friends protect me and just let him touch me. I was in 3rd grade. Me and my cousin, when we were kids, were walking trails in the woods near a dog park, and I noticed there was a guy following us around the bends. When we got to the end of the trail of the main road, we were like, what is he doing? And waited, and he was definitely touching himself, so we threw rocks at him and ran away. We knew he was being a weirdo, but didn't care. We thought it was a funny story. Looking back, if my kid told me that, my stomach would drop, and I'd be looking for that guy. I lost a fight with a murderer shortly before he killed someone. He was the creepy kid with dark eyes who rarely spoke, and you could tell he wasn't normal just by being around him. He scared the teacher-type kid. We were walking home from the bus stop, and he pushed me from behind. He didn't live in our neighborhood. He wasn't supposed to ride our bus. I landed on both knees in gravel. I stood up, turned around, and he punched me in the chest and stomach. My friends did nothing except scream and run. I went to get my sister's, a college football player's boyfriend. He chased the guy down and handled it. School was out the next week. We went to my grandma's house for the summer, and I forgot all about him. I was relieved that I had to switch schools because of my mom transferring out of state. Adriel Cleveland Lamont Simpson. I'll never forget his name or my sister's boyfriend, who, I tell myself, probably saved my life. Normally, I was a latchkey kid who was alone after school until 8 or 9 at night. Me and my friends used to go on teenchat.com as a group when we pretended 12 years old. We would pretend to be 14 or 15 because we thought that was old and cool. We would talk to other people of the same age, and it would always turn to sex. We thought these conversations were the funniest things. We were really so innocent, laughing about talking about sex with strangers on the internet. We'd often get requests for webcams, etc. We never did because we were always all squished into one tiny room fighting to see the screen. There was one time we convinced the guy we were talking to get on webcam for us. We made him do a full striptease, dancing, taking off his t-shirt, and spinning it around to throw it away. He was a grown man, of course, which we found even more entertaining. Once he got naked, we told him there was a group of us, and this was all the wind-up, and he got so mad. The phase ended, and I never thought about it again until my mid-20s when I thought, we were kids in pedo chat.